So I appreciate your time and your attention, and I will try to make this interesting and relevant. That being said, there is somewhat little science in the things I'm going to talk to you about today. I've given different iterations of this talk or subparts of this talk over the last several years, and I've sort of grouped some stuff together that I think may be useful. So presently, I'm this guy. Before I was this guy, I was, it should be rolling forward. I was this guy. As Jimmy said, I was the program director at Kings County for a little while. In between the Rennerts is what I always say. And it is true that being the program director at Kings County and helping to develop the people that are there really has been one of the highlights of my professional career. This is not rolling forward like it should. These are the things we'll be talking about today, really 5 things. I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership, especially in a context that was actually introduced to me by Dr. Lucchese, which is sort of an interesting way of thinking about leadership. And I'll talk a little bit about a partly real, partly fictional leader in the past, and draw some quotes that he had said to try to highlight some points I think they're important. Talk a little bit about teamwork as the landscape of academic medical centers change, as residencies change, teamwork becomes more and more important. Next, I have spent my entire career as an educator, and I really have tried to keep focused on that and master my craft as an educator. So I'll give you a few pointers, I think, about education. You guys, not we anymore, but you guys put a lot of graduates into academics, much more than a national average. So a lot of those people wind up in education. We'll talk for a few minutes about that. Finally, well, not finally, but the fourth, we'll talk about a few tips for the grads. I'll speak directly to you for a few minutes. And then lastly, one of the things that I've spent a lot of time talking about recently is longevity in the specialty. So in regards to leadership, does anyone have any idea who this is? No. Okay. Well, this is Attila the Hun, and this was obviously a real character, but became almost like this mythical being during a formative time in the history of the Residency. Attila was the leader of the Hunnic Empire during this time. If you look, it was not a long time period, right? About 20 years. But during that time, Attila, because of his ability to sort of organize people and motivate men, consolidate all these different tribes that were all across the Hunnic Empire. And at the time, you think about this, this is, sort of 450 AD, attacked the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire at the time was not only massive, but was essentially the uncontested power in the world. He also taxed the Eastern Empire and enforced that tax twice, which means he made people pay just to be his neighbors. And the last thing is he invaded Gaul, which essentially is modern day France, something that had not been done very often before that time. So this was the Hunnic Empire. Those of you that know geography are beginning to understand what a large area this is. I mean, this takes almost all of Eastern Europe goes from what's just about Germany all the way over to Kazakhstan, which is a massive area to overtake. The hierarchy of the Hun comes really from this book, and the book is written mostly tongue-in-cheek, but this guy, Wes Roberts, tried to pull some quotes and stories about Attila and help us understand how he was so successful as a leader. And there were 3 levels. And the reason I talk about this is because these quotes refer to these 3 levels. There was the king, who was Attila. Attila had subordinate leaders who were the chieftains. And then there were the actual Huns. And if you think about it, this hierarchical structure sort of applies to academic medicine. You know, you have the king, who is perhaps the CEO of the hospital, perhaps the chair of the department, perhaps the dean of the College of Medicine. You have chieftains. So depending on who the king is, the chieftain may be the chair or the director of service or the chief of service, or it may be the program director, or it may be the chief residence. But the point is that there's a hierarchy of people that are the bosses. There are people that essentially are subordinate leaders, and then they're the rank and file. I say all that to really talk a little bit about some of these principles, and these are quotes from the book from Attila the Hun, some from my father, who was the king when I was growing up, and then I'll talk a little bit about some other quotes later on. So leaders must attach value to high standards of performance and have no tolerance for the uncommitted. I absolutely believe this. If you settle, if you don't master your craft, master what you're doing, if you don't try to achieve excellence in your everyday life, then you will be forever left in a sort of a sea of mediocrity. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to be successful. It means that you have to try to seek excellence. And I believe it's okay to fail, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. But if you fail, you should fail forward, and you should fail. You should move forward. You should try things that are hard to do. This John Maxwell, who is a writer in the business literature, talks about failing forward, about using failure as an iterative process for improvement. So you fail, you focus on what went wrong, you iterate to get better, and then you reapply yourself to the task at hand. This comes from my father, who we affectionately called the big man when I was growing up. And my father said this to me probably 500 times over the course of the 20 years that I was living in his house. And what he always said is, son, don't confuse efforts with results. They are not the same. And the premise of that is, although it was a little bit of a hard-nosed statement, the premise of that is that you must keep trying. So trying really hard may not always be enough, right? And it's okay, again, to fail, but what we're looking for is results. And sometimes results are a long-term process and take, again, iteration. They take failure. They take getting better. And I have carried this statement with me, and I'm now in my 50s. I've carried this statement with me for a very long time, is to try to remember that the efforts that you put in are important, but also the results that you get out, and that we cannot give up. Aristotle had a different take on it, where he talked essentially about this idea of iteration and excellence as not really a goal. Excellence is not an endpoint. It is a habit. It is a recurrent mentality to keep up with. Now, I haven't been on faculty for a long time, 8 years now or 9 years. But this was one of the things that I tried to instill in the residents when I was program director, was sort of a relentless pursuit of excellence for themselves. And that doesn't mean to be perfect. What it means is that you seek to be better with every patient you see, that you seek to be better at lunch than you were at breakfast. You seek to be better on Tuesday than you were on the previous Monday. Committing wholly to mastering your craft. Being clear about your expectations are important. You will be leaders in your hospitals, in your departments, maybe within the residency, and being clear about what you expect people to do, I think, is critically important. Telling people and giving people clear expectations and telling them what you want makes it very clear for them to understand, as Attila would say it, the will of the king. And understanding what your bosses want, whether that be the chief residence or the program director, or eventually your departmental director or chair, is critically important. But it's also important for them to let you know what the expectations are. Maintaining respect for the people that work for you and the people that work with you is critically important. In teams, if you do not allow your subordinate leaders, the people that are working with you and for you, the privilege of making decisions, or refuse to show them respect, then, well, I'll talk about the respect in the next slide, but they will not get better, right? You must allow the people that work for you the privilege of making decisions appropriate to the level of responsibility. Every decision cannot be made by the boss. It essentially is a team sport. This is that second part that I was talking about, where you need to pay proper courtesy to your subordinate leaders. So the king to the chieftains and the chieftains to the Huns. If you don't show respect to them, then nobody else will either. So, and I'll talk a little bit about this when I get to the tips area, but essentially maintaining respect for people and treating them with respect is critically important. This is a quote that Lucchese used to say all the time. I don't know if he still does, but I have found this to be absolutely true, that when you step into chaos, when you step into a mess, there is always opportunity there. There's always a chance to make things better. There's always a chance to improve. But that is hard work. And if you look at complex adaptive systems like healthcare systems, like our department, before I came for sure, but was nothing but chaos. But a few sort of ragtag leaders tamed that chaos and turned it into one of the most, I consider, prestigious and academically driven departments in the country. And I don't mean academically driven as in putting out a ton of research, but I mean, when you think about the product that we put out and the number of residents that go into academic positions and take leadership positions, it is absolutely astounding. Presently, we're in a project, Holt and Ninfa and Jimmy and I are in a project with looking at essentially how many people are in leadership positions after coming out of county. And the numbers are stunning. This, I can't tell you how true this is. And this has been an issue in the past and in our department when final decisions are being made in the chieftain's headquarters, miles away from the front. When the leaders, or when you as a leader stop having street credibility, stop working the evening shifts, working the weekend shifts, it is a huge issue. You have to maintain your credibility. You have to pull the unfortunate shifts. Now, I don't know what Roger Holt is doing these days in regards to shifts, but when I was there, and Roger was essentially had a day job running, the UHBED, and I realize he now has, people that are helping him do that. That was his day job, and his night job was working shifts. Roger pulled shifts on the weekends, nights, holidays, to maintain credibility. Mike puts it a little more bluntly. He called me Bubba. I don't know if it was affectionate or whether he was just poking fun of me, but he called me Bubba, and I grew to love the name. And he essentially said, never stop wearing your stethoscope. And the idea is that once you stop seeing patients, you become a very, very, very expensive administrator. And to maintain credibility, both with the people above you and below you, it's important that you maintain a clinical practice. I believe this to be absolutely true as well. The reason that you make a six-figure salary as an emergency physician is because you take on liability and you make tough decisions. By the time the patient is hypotensive, tachycardic, is requiring fluids, pressors, source control, they have a necrotizing fasciitis or a Fournier's, the housekeeping staff, environmental services knows, that person is sick or what to do in that situation, antibiotics, fluids, source control. But your ability to make those decisions early, to be the big baller shot caller, is the reason that you have spent 8 years or more of your life honing these decisions and getting experience. And truly, the ability to make the difficult decisions is what is separating the leaders from just the people that are cranking out the rack. Several years ago, somebody gave me a book by Richard Bach, and it was life-changing. And it has a bunch of quotes in it, much like this Attila book. And this is one of the quotes, and I have remembered this several times a week, if not more, as I've sort of worked my way through my career. There's no such thing as a problem without a gift for you in its hands. You seek problems because you need their gifts. And this is the principle of trying to find the benefit on the other side of the problem, right? Is that life is full of troubles, right? But each one helps you become a better and better person, a better and better physician, a better and better leader, a better and better clinician. So find the gifts in the problems. Critical to a Hun's success is a clear understanding what the king wants. The best thing you can do in your career, and I firmly believe this, is to make your boss look good. Right? Commit yourself to your boss's vision. And that doesn't mean that you can't influence that vision, but understanding what your boss wants, understanding what the medical director values, understanding what CMS is paying hospitals to perform at, understanding the core measures, or understanding what drives your hospital's quality measures is critically important. Right? It is important to your success is to understand what are the drivers in your department. I believe that that I'm going to say men, but I don't mean men. I mean people. People desire boundaries. They seek discipline in their lives, and they are more willing to follow people that have discipline in their lives. And that doesn't mean you can't go out and have fun, but it means that that what you do matters and what you do is important. And having discipline and disciplining yourself to have time to read and time to master your craft and time to save time for your family. Have to lead a disciplined life in regards to your energy and your time, I think is critically important. Next, I'd like to essentially transition to teamwork. This is an African proverb. I find it to be true. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Teamwork will be a recurring part of your future, of your success. You may have seen this slide before. I've talked about this several times. I guess it would really only be the faculty and fellows that would have seen this lecture anytime before. But I want you to think about, and you can even look around in the, in the conference room or look around on the Zoom, and you can think about who the A team and the B team players are. And there's no names, right? Because the more important question for me is not who is who, but which are you? Do you think you're an A team player or a B team player? And I'm going to talk for a second about what those are and the differences. And I think spending some time thinking about this will help you be more certainly introspective, but also more successful and have a better insight into who you are and where you can improve. So these are classic attributes of A-team players. They're positive, proactive, confident, competent, compassionate. They're good communicators. They display integrity. They're driven by teamwork. They're trustworthy. They're teachers. They do what it takes to get it done. In an emergency department, maybe that's maintaining a sense of humor, maybe it's moving the meat, but these are the people. And when you go on a shift, you know who these people are, right? These are the people that are making the shift worthy of your time, right? Now, B team players are not the same. And everyone has a little bit of A team and a little bit of B team inside you. Right? B team players are negative. They're reactive, not proactive. They're often confused. They're usually not good communicators. They show up late, not just once. Everyone can show up late once or twice, but they're late consistently. They're dishonest, perhaps only intellectually dishonest, but they are dishonest. They're complainers. When an idea comes up, the first thing you hear out of their mouth is, that's not going to work. They always seem to be surprised by what's happening, right? They've not been proactive, and often I find them arrogant. So with an A-team player, or you get people together that are A players, they will look for areas to be better, look for ways for the team to work better. They see it as their job to improve things. They don't sit there and complain about how the EMR is not servicing their needs. They find ways for that EMR to be more adaptive, or find ways that they can work towards process improvement in the EMR or in operations flow within the department. It doesn't mean everything has to be rosy. A-team players see flaws in the process. They see flaws within themselves. B-team players see flaws in other people, right? They expect other people to fix the issue. They complain the process doesn't work. They find, they're always sort of talking about the negative sides of this. And truly, when you get really on a great team, it's not the leaders, but it's the players that are leading, right? So it's the rank and file physicians, it's the rank and file faculty rather than the medical director that are leading change and changing things in the department. So this is a Fleck quote. Bad teams, no one leads. Average teams, the coaches lead, but elite teams, the players lead. And I think the real question that you have to ask yourself is when you look in the mirror, and everyone should see some A team, some B team traits, but you look in the mirror, what do you see? And if you see something today, can you make changes to see more A team attributes tomorrow? Right? Because often what happens is people don't understand that they are the B team players. When an A team player looks in the mirror, they see areas to improve. What do you think a B team player sees when they look in the mirror? They see an A team player, right? Often B team players have a lack of insight into the fact that they are B team players. So I would spend some time thinking about this mirror exercise, thinking about the attributes that we talked about here. And even more so here. Let's talk for a second about education. I've spent my whole life as an educator. And I do have some thoughts on it that I would impart to you. No matter what you do, you are going to need to provide education. Maybe that's to the junior faculty, junior attendings in your shop. Maybe it's to residents or PA students or medical residents or whatever. Maybe it's to patients. Maybe it's to nurses. It may be to administrators. Right? But you are going to have to provide education at some point. And one of the things that I have spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about is learner-centered models of education. So what we see here is a citric acid cycle, and if your gallbladder is getting itchy, looking at the Krebs cycle, that's an okay thing. I put the Krebs cycle up here because it is a prime example of preceptor-centered models of education, where what is taught is centered around what the preceptor knows, not what the learner needs. You had to learn the Krebs cycle because your professor had to learn the Krebs cycle. And they had to learn the Krebs cycle because their professor had to learn the Krebs cycle. And that person had to learn it because Krebs was teaching them. Right? So the idea that we have to memorize that acetyl-CoA comes off here and that this many NAD go to NAPH here and how many ATP are formed with each turn of the cycle, where pyruvate enters and exits the cycle, is actually not critically important unless you're a a molecular physiologist, or maybe a toxicologist. Right? Everyone else needs to understand generally how ATP is generated and how the body is powered. I use this as a prime example because all of you had to learn this nonsense or the coagulation cascade in medical school. But that's not important. What's important is to understand the pathophysiology of sepsis, is to understand why high flow oxygen is a treatment for carboxyhemoglobin toxicity. Excuse me, carbon monoxide toxicity. So when you're going to teach somebody something, when you're going to build an educational module, start with what the learner needs. Don't start with what you know. Sit down and do a learner needs analysis and come up with the actual needs of the learner. I apologize for that typo. I could have sworn I corrected that. But obviously holy is spelled wrong here. This is my quote, and I have said it many times, and I've said it to every associate program director, every assistant program director I've ever had. And at this point, there's been 15. We have one solitary product as educators, as medical educators. That product is graduates of our program. And the only thing I do of any importance in my life in the office, so not what I do necessarily clinically, but the only thing that I produce as an educator is graduates of my program. So I would ask you to invest wholly in that product line. Right? If you were a company that only made one particular type of electronics, you try to make it the best goddamn electronic on the market, whatever that is. Commit wholly to it being the best on the market. The benefit of being at Kings County, SUNY Downstate, is that the substrate to train clinical emergency physicians is absolutely stellar. Now, I believed when I was there that it was uniquely stellar, and I don't necessarily believe that anymore. I think there are a lot of places that have the same substrate or have similar substrate, but it's absolutely there, and it's not everywhere. And whether you realize it or not, you are truly lucky to train at a place where you have the patients that you do. So as educators, if the substrate is high grade and you commit wholly to the product, you can produce amazing physicians, which is what I believe they do. Three rules of success. We're moving sort of, I guess, to through the end of the education piece into the beginning of the tips piece. But integrity matters. Say what you mean what you say. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you can't do it, then tell people you're not going to be able to do it. Be very clear about what you're going to do. Is Disney uses this under promise, over deliver philosophy. Two, say you're sorry. It ain't going to kill you, right? Saying you're sorry is one of the most beautiful things you can do as a person, is just to apologize. And people don't do it because they think it makes them weak. Three was sort of a joke. When I became a program director, Mike and Stefan sat me down and gave me the 3 rules of being a program director. And And the third was kill them, don't maim them. He's talking about residents and also residents with patients. Also another Doty quote. And anyone that that was a resident when I was in the program director's office, whether that be as an APD or as the PD, I think can attest to this. This was my philosophy: is I had unapologetic high expectations of the learners. I wanted them to be excellent. And then I held them accountable to those expectations. And that produced outstanding physicians, because you're dealing with some fantastic substrate. You're dealing with people that are driven, right? Nobody goes to the Kings County SUNY Downstate Residency to take it easy, right? The people that choose to go there are a selective cohort. There's a tremendous spectrum bias of the people that apply to and match to that program. And I also believe that learners rise to the expectations that are laid before them. If you expect a lot out of people, you will get a lot out of people. Expect the learners to do very well, and they will. So Greg Henry quote, and I think it is, he's talking about clinical medicine, but I find it to be true of a lot of things. And it isn't what you don't know that kills the patient. It's what you think you know that isn't true. And I think it's true in a lot of places in life that that being sure of something is always potentially a dangerous place to be. I have a few tips for success, speaking mostly to the graduates, but certainly everyone can take something from this. Argue for your limitations, and sure enough, you get to have them. It's another Richard Bach requirement, quote. And the idea is that if you say that you can't do it, if you feel like, oh, you know, I can't do that, that seems too hard for me, or I'm not smart enough to be, you know, a medical education fellow, or I don't think that I have what it takes to be an academic doc at, you know, X and X residency. If you argue for your limitations, you get to have them. You're right. If you don't believe you're smart enough to be a Tox fellow, then you're not going to be. You're not going to be a Tox fellow. If you argue for your limitations, you will get to have them. So don't set limitations on yourself. You have no idea the things that you can accomplish. Also a Doty quote: the key to any success I have had lies not in any sort of intelligence. Anyone that knows me closely can confirm that, but in my commitment to work as hard as required. So there's nothing like a little bit of elbow grease and commitment to outworking people that will make you successful, as far as I'm concerned. The smartest people I know are not necessarily the most intelligent. They are people that work hard and learn from their mistakes. Although a little crass, this is something that my father said all the time. And what I would say is, well, I wish that wasn't true, Dad, or I wish I had this, or I wish I had that. And my dad, who was a former Marine, if such thing exists, would say, well, why don't you wish in one hand, shitting in the other, and see which one fills up first? And the principle is that if you want it, you should make it happen. You work at it until it comes into being. Set down what you want and make it happen. You have agency in your life. You can make things happen. And we're going to wind up the quotes a little bit because I realize that they can get tedious. But I think each one illustrates a point of leadership that I want you guys to think about. And this is probably my favorite Thomas Edison sort of quote. Thomas Edison tried 10,000 things before he finally got the one that worked, carbonated paper and eventually tungsten, in order to invent the light bulb. And what he said it at a dinner party one time. He said, well, and they said, how can you keep doing this? How can you do these things thousands and thousands and thousands of times and fail every single time? Because he would try tortoiseshell, and then he would try coconut husk, and then he would try this, that, the other thing to find out what's going to be the filament in the light bulb. And he always said, I've never once failed. I have, however, successfully ruled out many pathways that absolutely will not work. And that principle is just that you have to see failure as a mechanism of learning and achieving success. Learn from your mistakes. Develop a vision quest. Your vision for yourself. Commit it to paper. Write it down. It doesn't have to be the last one you ever write. You can revise it. But writing down your vision for what you want to be as a clinician, as an academic, as a dad, as a husband, as a son, as a world citizen, as a person that lives, in the social contract of this country and of other, with other people. Who do you want to be? Develop your vision, commit it to paper, and then check in with it. You will find that it changes, and that's okay. But writing down your vision is important. And the last quote from the big man for now. Very often when I would told my father that I was sorry about something I had done, he would say, well, don't be sorry, just fix it. And the principle is that you have agency in your life. It's okay to be sorry, but fix it, do better. So 10 rules. This is specifically for the graduates that are going out. When you leave the county, referring back to county doesn't go over well, right? You learned how to do it at Kings County. It doesn't mean it's the only way to be done, right? Referring back to the way that we did it at our program, you can use that as a sort of as an idea, but you have to be tactful in the way that you bring it up. Be tactful when citing the medical literature, humiliating your co-residents, humiliating your consultants. And this is not something I was always good at, but being an intellectual bully is not the best way to go. It's okay to know the literature, and it's okay to cite the medical literature, but you have to do it in a tactful way. You have met intellectual bullies. Nobody really likes being around them. Ask for advice often. I don't know is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And having a concept of the limits of your own knowledge is one of the best things you can do as a junior attending. I try to end every conversation with somebody that I'm working with thank you. Even if a resident is presenting a case to me, I end the conversation with thank you. Be polite. It goes a long way. The world is an easier place for people that are polite. when you go to your new place, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It doesn't mean that you can't do your own stuff, but you have to learn how to survive within that new institution. And that sort of goes hand in hand with this rule. And don't try to change things in the first 6 months. You'll have good ideas, but you'll just be seen as rocking the boat. My father always told me that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, and he gave them to you in that ratio for a reason. Spend time listening, perhaps twice as much time listening as you do talking. Rule number 7, avoid getting pulled into long-standing conflicts that you don't completely understand. It's okay to jump in when you get to your new shop. First thing you ought to do is focus on passing your boards, but it's okay to jump into a project. But jumping into a project and jumping into a conflict are 2 very different things. And I didn't really have a concept of how much politics permeates, and I don't mean national politics. I mean interpersonal politics permeates academic medicine. And longstanding conflicts usually have more to do with interpersonal politics than they do with patient care. So be careful about doing that. I don't think anyone actually calls 718-245-4601 anymore, but every once in a while we'd have one of our graduates that would call. I would ask you to maintain these friendships. It gets lonely out there. You move from a place where you're on with 7 or 8 residents and 5 attendings, or 10 residents and 6 attendings, to being the doc, the only doc, and it gets lonely. So maintain these friendships, and you don't have to necessarily call CCT or C1, the old C1 line, to get advice every time. But I would certainly encourage you to maintain connectivity with the people that you trained with. It gets very lonely, and loneliness is an independent risk factor for death. And that's actually a true statement. It is a bigger risk factor than obesity, and a bigger risk factor than ethanol use. Loneliness kills. You don't necessarily completely understand the benefit from which you come. You are exceptionally trained as emergency physicians. The faculty that you look around and see as just senior faculty, in my mind, are gods walking amongst men. And I believe it to be true. Roger Holt and Mike Lucchese and Bonnie Arquilla and Bonnie Barron and Stefan Rennert, although I realize he's not there anymore, and Rich Sennert and Ray Austin, and some, so some of these names and some you don't. They are gods walking amongst men. And you are exceptionally well trained, being from Kings County. And that is a true statement after 20-something years of practice. I promise you. And then the last thing is I want to impart to you that you owe. You owe a huge debt to all the faculty, the teachers, and the only way you can pay this forward, the only way you can pay it back is to pay it forward, is to do the best for your patients and a helping hand to those that come after you. Investing in the next generation of physicians, medical students, developing that junior attending who shows up at your clinical shop, teaching the nurses, learning from them, teaching them, critically important. You graduate in debt to people that you will not pay back. Last is a couple of things about longevity. I won't take much time with this. I have long lectures on this stuff, but I would just ask you to think about a few things about resiliency, right? Not going to get the big wellness talk, right? But I just want you to think about a few things. First of all, you have an occupational hazard, and that is burnout in emergency medicine. You have no mandated protections to this, right? This worker has a hard hat and coveralls and gloves, and he's tied into the scaffolding. If he shows up without his hard hat, they send him home, right? You don't have any mandated protections for your occupational hazard of burnout. So you have to protect yourself. Part of it is just realizing that there's a rough road ahead, that adversity is part of what we do, that you have a front row to the ills of society. Expecting that you have a rough road will help you manage it. And I hope you do manage it. I hope you find a way to steer through the potholes. I won't spend a lot of time talking about these 7 strategies, but these are 7 strategies in the medical literature that are proven to increase personal resiliency. Make no mistake about it, your resiliency problems, the burnout problem, is not your fault. You do have some onus to increase your personal resiliency, but most of what's going on is in medicine are cultural issues and institutional issues, not personal issues. But there are things you can do. You can reframe your thinking, you can practice positivity, you can deepen the connectivity you have with other people, clarify your purpose, which we'll talk about in a minute. Manage your own stuff. Like, you have to realize that you bring baggage to work. And last is engage in your environment. Superman has things that make him strong and things that make him weak. The yellow sun strengthens Superman. Kryptonite weakens him. Knowing where your kryptonite is, knowing what your yellow sun is, what recharges you, what takes away your power and your resiliency and your mental and physical reserve. Knowing what those things are and engaging your environment, mitigating the kryptonite and engaging in your yellow sun is critically important. Spend time thinking about that, and you will find yourself with a long, happy career in emergency medicine. It's a different way of thinking about this, right? How do you recharge your batteries? Is it through reading literature? Is it from rock climbing? Is it your family? Is it your faith-based organization? Is it hanging out with friends? Find what your sun is. Find your yellow sun. Bathe in it. We have an issue in emergency medicine. We have to normalize the conversation around it. Normalize the conversation around the everyday struggles of what we go through. There are also some things that you can do today to increase your resiliency. You can go home tonight and do some things and increase your resiliency for tomorrow. Oops. One is exercise. And a regular exercise program is critically important. It releases endorphins and enkephalins in your body. Not only does it make you physically stronger, but these neurochemicals increase long-term resiliency. Intellectual exercise is important. Having things you're interested in outside of work, critically important. Have a hobby. Engage in it. Get some sleep. Okay, maybe not like this. I track my sleep very closely. It's one of the things that I absolutely find time for every night. I didn't do this as a resident, and I suffered because of it. I was not as good a physician as I could have been had I paid more attention to getting enough sleep. And it's hard enough if you have a primary sleep disorder, or you're working shifts, you're working nights, days, the sunlight's in your eyes if you're sleeping during the day. Maintaining a reasonable sleep schedule is an important thing. Maintaining human connection is critically important. The depth and the density of the relationships that you have with other people will get you through the hard times. The other thing is that I think we also need a more stereotypical female sort of response to disclosure. If somebody says they're having a problem, a stereotypical male response would be to give them a solution to the problem. A stereotypical female response would be to commiserate. People want commiseration. People want to be seen. They want to feel like you understand what they're going through. Lastly, because we're getting a little over time, these are the 6 sort of things that you can do today to understand how to increase your resiliency. And we'll talk about impact last. I'm just going to leave this slide up for 1 second. This is an email that I got from one of our forensic nurses. So, I'm big and burly and 6'4" and 280 pounds, and the residents were all terrified of me because I'm super serious at work. But this one resident sort of stood up to me when I was trying to discharge a patient. And pushed back a little bit on me, which was probably not an easy thing for her to do. And she saved this kid's life. Because she pushed back on me, I went back and spent a little more time on the case. Basically, this young kid came in, had some petechiae on the face. I checked the platelets and did some low-lying intellectual work and didn't really think too deeply about the case. Mom seemed like she was a reasonable person, wasn't hurting the kids. So inflicted injury crossed my mind. But I discounted it. It was near the end of my shift. I was being intellectually lazy. So the resident pushed back a little bit and made me think more deeply about this case. And the results were astounding. She saved this kid's life. This kid had a younger sibling, saved her life. Mom's at home with this boyfriend. So probably saved her life as well. So with a 10-second conversation, pushing back against her program director, she saved 3 lives. That's the impact that you have. That's what you do every day. And if you have time, I would encourage you to watch this video. The QR code for the video is here. It is a story told from the perspective of a patient 10 years after she came into a trauma center in Florida. And then what she does to sort of get in touch with the people that took care of her. For the doctor that took care of her son, it was a normal Tuesday. For her, it was not a normal Tuesday. It's a day she remembers for the rest of her life. It's absolutely worth taking a look at this. Don't worry, we're almost done. I would ask you to remember your tudes, your attitude and gratitude. Having gratitude about the things in your life is important, scientifically proven. So they looked at people that kept journals, and there were 3 groups: people that kept a journal of random things that happened that day, people that kept a journal of negative things that had happened that day, and a group that kept a journal of positive things that happened that day. And they looked at scores on a validated, essentially happiness scale after that time. And they showed that people that maintained a gratitude journal were happier over time. And that effect lasted past the study. Interestingly, they also found that people just kept a regular journal ended up recording mostly positive things. So the difference between those two groups was smaller, but the people that recorded negative things tended to have a more negative outlook on life, which extended past the study time. So gratitude matters. Being thankful matters. The last slide that I will have you look at is the story of the two wolves. And you may have heard this before or not, but there are two wolves inside all of us. There's a good wolf who represents empathy and love, agape, compassion. And there's a bad wolf who represents jealousy and hatred and laziness and judgment. And within all of us, these two wolves are constantly battling over which trait gets to be displayed. So the question that's often asked is, well, which wolf wins? And the answer is, it's the wolf you feed, right? Your mental energy, your time is either spent in positive ways or negative ways. Which wolf do you pay attention to? Which wolf do you feed? And with that, I'll close out my overlong talk